You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hi. Okay, I'm so excited. My guest today is Nicole Edwards. Nicole and I got to know each other through our shared experience over at Speaking Your Brand with Carol Cox in the Thought Leadership Academy. I just loved her story and clicked with her and asked her to come on the show. So, who is Nicole? In 2019, Nicole created Edwards Authentic, a vision brought to life by providing transformative experiences for professional women. Through insightful content, courses, and retreats, Nicole aspires to create a sanctuary for women to flourish in their personal and professional endeavors. She is a co-author of the International Women of Color Who Boss Up, an Amazon best-selling book seen on CBS and NBC. And she also has a professional background in mental health and talent development that spans over 20 years. Nicole has been a catalyst for growth for people and organizations, working with thousands of individuals in educational, corporate, and nonprofit settings. She dedicates her life's work to stir others to live and lead from a deeply authentic space. With her masterful approach to learning and speaking, Nicole has been afforded opportunities to design certificate and leadership courses for emerging leaders, facilitate corporate retreats, speak at international conferences, and land a spot on the big red dot with her TEDx talk called In Your Eyes. Bam. All right, so we get into all of this today. Of course, we talk about Nicole's professional career and background and the work she does with women today. We talk about some of her childhood experiences that led her to where she is today and how they've impacted her life. We talk about a lot of through lines. We also talk about a Oprah series on her show that changed Nicole's life. We talk about her motherhood journey, particularly around her son's autism diagnosis. And truthfully, so much more. This is such a great conversation that ultimately centers around authenticity. And I think you will hear and come to agree, as I do, that Nicole exudes authenticity from her pores. So here she is. As always, stay tuned after for my final thoughts. Bye. Hey, Nicole. So nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, I heard you share your story on Jesse's podcast. And of course, you know, I've gotten to know some of your stories through Carol's Academy. And so it just seemed very fitting to have you come share a little bit about who you are and what you're about here with me today. So thank you.
I appreciate it. I really, really do.
All right. So you have a background in mental health. I want to ask you about that first and what that background is and how you got into that.
Sure. So I studied mental health the first time I was in graduate school, like 20 years ago, right out of undergraduate. And to be honest with you, when I graduated from undergrad, I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I knew that I needed to continue to go to school, but I just wasn't settled. I thought maybe it was teaching, something definitely in a service-oriented capacity. But it was actually, I think, my senior year that I had been a TA for a professor, and she told me all about this counselor education program at the University of Florida, and I was hooked immediately. She was, told me about the different tracks and how I could study either mental health or school or family therapy, and just she was an amazing mentor, and I aspired to be like her. Those people that come into your life. And so I followed that. And once I stepped foot into the program, I knew that it was something that I wanted to pursue.
Mhm.
I've always been fascinated and interested in psychology and all things of the mind, and especially to help others, with those issues. And probably stems from my family. When you grow up and you're around your parents and your siblings and extended family, sometimes you wonder what's going on in that mind of theirs. And so I feel like Counselor Ed was a perfect fit. And I studied that, graduated with a master's degree and a specialist degree, and I went immediately working with teenage girls in an
Mm.
at-risk alternative school. But I served as a mental health professional for them.
Wow. Okay, so what did that look like on a regular basis? Like what I don't know. I mean, what was that experience like?
It was intense.
Yeah.
It was definitely something that probably took me 80 hours a week, but it was probably one of the most fulfilling roles I had ever experienced. It felt like I hit a home run right out of school.
Hmm.
So what that looked like is it was an alternative school. It's called PACE. I don't know if you're familiar
Oh,
with
I've
the
heard
PACE
of it.
Center for
Yeah.
Girls.
Yeah.
So it's not a residential program and it's not quite a juvenile detention center. It's kind of like in between.
Right.
And the school is relatively small, maybe 50 or so students, and half of those students were on my individual caseload.
Wow.
So I did individual sessions. I also did group sessions and other programming, with the school.
Mm.
So it was something that I was just really excited to be a part of. I saw myself reflected in their eyes back to me, and I aspired to be what I needed at that time, in my life.
Yeah. Having that experience with teen girls, you know, was there anything that you learned or that you experienced through them or with them that really surprised you or that would surprise people to know?
I'm not sure surprised, is a necessary word that I would describe. I think maybe if I take a step back, you would be surprised to know how resilient young women are,
Mm.
and the things that are encountered, whether it's in the home or somehow connected to that, would literally make you weep.
Mm.
The things that people are subjected to in the lives that girls specifically lead.
Yeah.
The reason why PACE was such a remarkable place is because it was gender specific programming, and the people that created the program knew that in order to serve this specific population, there needs to be a gender specific focus. There's things that we experience as women and as young women that are unique to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that would be surprising. You'd be surprised how resilient they indeed are with the proper care and the opportunity to let their voice be heard, with a person, that one caring adult. And in that circumstance, probably multiple caring adults pouring into them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to have, 50 students, half of them on your caseload. I mean, that sounds nearly impossible to do fully and also maintain your own life and sanity. I mean, I don't know. Like, this just it speaks to, and I don't know if it's still that way, but I've had other conversations with school counselors and things, and when you think about how there's one counselor for an entire student
Hmm.
body, it's mind
Yeah.
boggling.
Definitely. It's not something that I could have sustained
Mm-hmm.
in fact, I only worked there for about 3 years.
Yeah, it
And
probably
I
felt
don't,
like 30
yeah,
though.
yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely did. As fulfilling as it was,
Mm-hmm.
the burnout is real.
Yeah.
And in fact, even though I studied both school counseling and mental health counseling, it was one of the reasons why I didn't want to go in a public school situation, because I didn't want to just do paperwork.
Right.
I didn't want to have a caseload of 200 students and not be able to make an impact, not in the way that I was able to, in a smaller, very specific setting, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree. Even when I say that, 25 students was a
That's
lot.
a lot.
Yeah.
That's a big time commitment. It's a big emotional commitment. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like even to have 5 students
Yeah.
in that environment where they're not meeting with you you're not in private practice.
Right.
You have only a couple of hours where they have available where they're not, in class. They're not, it's like, it's very intense. It's very
Yeah.
intense. And all right, so, and you said something that I think a lot of us feel, right, is that you wanted to be someone that you felt like you needed, or that you could replicate that experience or make right that experience. I mean, what now, having the hindsight, like, what were you looking for as a kid? Like, what were you trying to heal there? Or, I don't know, speak to your, I guess, your childhood experience a little, Nicole.
Yeah, of course. I would consider myself, when I was a younger child, in hindsight, I would consider myself a highly sensitive person, but didn't have the words for it,
Mm-hmm.
nor did my family have the words for it.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself being, and it's not sensitive, just emotionally sensitive. It's kind of like your nervous system. Everything is kind of an integration, of sorts.
Yeah.
It's not just I'm emotional. I was extremely sentimental to the point where it made others uncomfortable sometimes.
Hmm.
I definitely had an imagination that, went unmatched, and I felt truly misunderstood. I,
Mm-hmm.
I just remember feeling that way. And because I had such I equally had bright eyes to the world. So I was so naturally curious and just awestruck by things, and you know just to be, I was thinking of like, in school, like the first time I went to school, I thought, wow, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
I just thought
Uh,
everything was
that's
so
sweet.
exciting, and
Right.
yeah, I romanticized a bit, right?
Right.
Um, and as I grew older, and my childhood was pretty good. It did have its share of bumps. I had experienced my parents' divorce.
Mm-hmm.
We had a blended family. I'm also of mixed race, so that didn't bring any issues probably until middle school,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of thrust me into seeking my identity even deeper. Um, but when I hit the teenage years, I think something happened with me, and maybe because I was so bright-eyed and because I was so curious and equally sentimental, I found myself in. I mean, I can remember the first boyfriend I ever had was a very traumatic experience, and I had nothing else to base it on. And there was nobody around me that knew what was going on, or
Mm-hmm.
potentially didn't even think to ask me what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it led me into some really dark circumstances. And thank God I got out of it. I was able to break that. But I needed someone to give me guidance and to understand, you know, before I, let it go too long, like what of those things that you need to pay attention to. How do you know if somebody is abusive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Emotionally, um, physically, whatever it might be. And I didn't have those tools. And I felt like I definitely needed that.
And you were in high school.
Yes,
Have you seen that now play out in later in life?
absolutely. Yeah. I definitely connect it after doing work on thinking about your history and your childhood and possibly your trauma. I definitely have seen myself repeating patterns, sometimes not exactly in the same way, but I can surely see lines that go through my relationships with men for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And I do believe, as cliche as it sounds, it stems back to my relationship with my father.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so how can you recall, how did you get out of it, as you said, or get through it? I mean, how?
You might giggle, but I was an avid watcher of the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Nice.
Yes. And still to this day, she was one of my, oh my God,
Yeah.
biggest teachers in my life. I feel like she's my personal mentor.
Hmm.
And honestly, it was a series that she was doing on how to identify emotional abuse and
Wow.
how to pay attention to the signals and what to do. Like, what is the thing? Like, I heard on one of the shows, if a man hits you once, you need to get out.
Hmm.
because it might lead to you not living anymore.
Wow.
And I took it literally, and I'm
Yeah.
glad I did.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, it took all of the strength, and I do believe somehow I was divine, it was divine intervention. I got the strength to one day say enough,
Yeah.
in my 15-year-old self.
Yeah.
And I honestly never looked back. It was hard. He pleaded, his family pleaded,
Wow.
because they didn't know what was going on. And I had somehow had garnered the strength to never ever look back.
Yeah. You're talking about a high school relationship the way
Mhm.
someone could talk about an adult relationship. I mean, the family pleading, all of that. I mean, how that's intense for a kid.
For
Because you're
sure.
a kid. You're 15. You're a
Yeah.
kid.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But
He.
Oprah, that's amazing. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. I honest. I mean.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it speaks to, granted, Oprah is a huge human being of a platform and
Right.
brand and everything, but it really speaks to the importance of sharing stories and the importance of really, and this is now just connecting right to the work you're doing now, right? I mean, I just clicked why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Made my own connection there. All right, so Nicole, so I
Yeah.
I know we're gonna like skip a bunch of years, but it ties so well, like to your business now, what you're about.
Yeah.
It speaks to exactly that. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So the mental health counseling was my foundation. But then I realized, as we talked through about burnout and all of those things, I felt like the clinical aspect, I wanted to do more. And I wanted to blend kind of my yearnings to teach and counsel, kind of mesh them together. So then I stumbled upon training and facilitation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole personal development and helping people to really look at themselves, tap into their strengths, but also maybe address those areas that they'd like to grow in. So fast forward to my business today, I still facilitate workshops and I do speaking engagements to really help people to honor their authentic selves and to pay attention to that inner voice.
Mm-hmm.
We hear that all of the time. And what does that really mean? Paying attention to your inner voice is something that is cultivated over time. I think it's the heart of authenticity. And I do believe it's dynamic, right? It's not something that you arrive at and now you have mastered it. It is an iterative process. You will do that probably until the last breath that you take. And so when you pay attention to that inner voice and you figure out how to connect to it, you are a powerhouse. You become a powerhouse in your own right and you start co-creating, the outcomes that you want to see in your life. And the thing about this is that it's sometimes it's ugly. A lot of times people will misunderstand you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they'll from the outside looking through their lens look at you like you don't know what you're talking about, right? And us as women, we're socialized to take care of other people and to really, you know in a lot of ways take care of other people before ourselves. And it's when we tune in and really trust our inner voice and trust the follow through of it, I just feel like it's like poof, miracles happen. And that is a personal, job, but it also expands to how we show up in everything, our relationships, our professional space, all
Mm-hmm.
of it.
Mm-hmm. So, your inner voice now, we just heard, your inner voice at 15 combined with Oprah. Like, can you pinpoint other pivotal moments that taught you about your inner voice and really when you had to trust it and learn to trust it?
Yes, I can definitely pinpoint that. Um, Going along the line of relationships, if I fast forward, I did mention that I saw a pattern happening in my life. And I was married in 2008, I believe. And I have now 17-year-old twins, but I've always wanted kids.
Yeah.
And I had kids before I got married, and then was eventually married, but it went down in a blaze, boy. It
Mm-hmm.
was not. I leading into that was not paying attention to my inner voice. And then once it started showing up and once I started doing the work, it became crystal clear that I had made the wrong decision.
Mm.
This was not a decision that could have sustained time in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was definitely pivotal because it was so brutal that it smacked me awake.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, you learned a lot up into here. Let me show you all the things that you've been through before. Now it's time to turn this around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I was thinking too, I jotted down as you were talking before, and it relates to what you're saying now. I heard recently this term that it's like you're having your villain phase. And it's very negative, right? And it's not, I don't
Yes.
love it, but it was, what it was speaking to was to others when you're really just listening to yourself, acknowledging that maybe, you know what, for me, I made a wrong choice in this marriage, this relationship, and moving forward, setting your boundaries, that to others, it is as if you're just this different person. You're this potentially villain, right? But I thought it was kind of like cutesy in a way, you know, a little too negative for my liking, but the point was made, you know?
I love it.
Yeah.
I think that is so like spot on
Yeah.
how others perceive you. Absolutely. And I mentioned earlier, it's ugly sometimes, right?
Yeah, right. That's what I jotted it down. I'm like,
yeah,
it's like having your villain phase.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you do, and maybe you experience this too, but a lot of times in that self-development phase and that reflection phase, like, you don't want to be around people. You don't want to be talking to people. You just need to be in your own space, in your own head. And having twins, it's like when you come out of your head, you're caring for the people that need you. And then you go back in and you're nodding. Yep. No one can see you nodding, but you're nodding.
I'm nodding profusely. Yes.
Yeah.
And I also jotted down in my notes, just reflecting, that's why it's so important to be in the right partnership. I'm in my 40s now, and it's clearer than ever, in order to have that fertile ground that you need when you partner with somebody. Don't get me wrong, you have to do your personal work. Mm-hmm. Everything stems from people doing their personal work. But when you partner, right, now you are going alongside with someone and you're going to continue to grow, especially if you're focused on personal development. And those moments will happen, right? Where now you get new insights and now you have leveled up. And it's so important to have the right person, because it's going to be blaringly obvious when it's not the right person, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And then perhaps, like we're saying, that villain comes out. And I do think that's why sometimes relationships do end. It's not the only reason, but I think that that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with Heather Chauvin. She's a coach, a life coach, and her book is called Dying to Be a Good Mother. And we basically had an interview that turned into a therapy session for me with her, or like a coaching session with her. But one of the things that she said to me was, obviously I'm taking out a lot of context here of the conversation, but the line that it's making me think of is a lot of times when we hold ourselves back, it is because of we fear that our growth will cause us to lose the person that we're with. And sometimes maybe that you need to, right? You need to shed that person.
Yeah.
And other times it's just the fear of the possibility and the unknown of like,
wow,
if I really change who I am and what I'm about, what I stand for, what I don't. I mean, there's a little bit of fear of how that's going to shift a dynamic that you've probably been in for years and might be very comfortable for the other person.
But what's funny is that I've also experienced on the flip side, when you are trying to, and maybe you haven't gotten the insight that you need to let go, others are perceiving, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that you're going somewhere and they try to hold you back.
Yeah. That's not cool. But it helps you see it, right?
Absolutely. And it's not comfortable. Oh my. It's like the most painful lesson and the most loss is hard, but it's essential also in some instances for growth,
Yeah. So now looking at your kids, I mean, what parts of this are you able to translate to them and how you speak to them and how you're raising them and all of that?
That's such a great question. So as I mentioned, I have twins. I have one boy and one girl. And what I really am intentional with in my parenting is number one, modeling for them how to apologize,
Mm.
how to admit when you're wrong, how to be truthful and voice, where you stand. With my daughter, she is probably more like me in the highly sensitive way. She's an extremely deep thinker,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I find that she feels guilt for feeling as deeply as she does. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful that I can be there for her to be the voice that says, you should never do that.
Mm-hmm.
No, let's honor that your thinking is beautiful. Like, and I give her what I never had, and is
Mm-hmm.
that validation that your unique perspective should be cultivated and it's who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And don't ever dim that, and don't ever feel guilty for that or bad or shame because of that. And I think that's my one of my biggest honor of being a parent, uh, is just that, And I'm also not attached to the outcome, if that makes sense. It's been hard, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a perfect parent, but I'm not a, I don't feel an anxiety for having them be who I need them to be.
Yeah.
I want them to be who they are.
Yeah.
And I'll go wherever you're going. Now, if it's causing you danger, right?
Right.
I
Right.
needed someone to wave a flag and be like, hey, come back here. You know what I mean?
Right. You're still
That's not
their
what I'm
parent.
talking about.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
still their parent.
Right.
I'm their parent for
Right.
sure. But to be in the space where you feel seen
Mm-hmm.
is transformative.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is an offering that I can give to them, and hopefully that they will pass on to their children.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to address that, but I meant to reiterate it when you said it the first time and you said it again. I absolutely appreciate so much how you took even just a second to really define what you mean by sensitive, because I struggle with that. I'm very um sensitive. Like there's no other
Hmm.
word, but like
Right.
everyone just associates sensitivity with
Yeah.
feeling, and
Yep.
I'm that person. If there's a television on and a toy
Hmm.
and the dishwasher is humming, it's like too much.
Yep.
Like turn the
Yep.
TV down, turn the toy off, the dishwasher is enough. Like I just it's sensitive. It's sensitive to touch, it's sensitive to
Yep.
noise, it's
Yep.
sensitive, it's all of it. So
It's sensory. Yeah,
sensory
absolutely.
is really what it is. Yeah.
And Christy, even for me, it goes even to like, and don't get, I might be a little woo woo, but spiritually, emotionally. So, for example, when I was a little kid, I was the kid in the room next door to my siblings because I couldn't watch the horror movie. And I still to this day do not and will not watch horror movies because I feel like it seeps in to my being. And
Yeah.
I just refuse to have that in my life, and call it whatever,
Yeah.
make,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not for me.
Yeah. No, and you know what? It's reminding me, and it might be a little different than what you're saying, but it's reminding me now that oh my gosh, I have the hardest time. Like, look, I love animals, but I'm not like on the front lines fighting for animal rights. Okay. But I cannot watch an animal be hurt in a film or a television show. Like horses, forget, I can't watch war movies. Like, I can't.
Yeah.
And I cannot watch like crime shows where something happens to a kid. Like,
Yeah.
and that's changed
Yeah.
since becoming a parent. I never liked it. I was never like enjoying it, right? But I could watch it and put it in a box.
Hmm.
Now it's like it's painful. Like it
Mhm.
hurts me
Yeah.
to see that, and I want to go in my brain, this isn't real. This is a story. This isn't happening. You don't need to actually jump into the screen and fight for that person.
Yeah, for for sure.
My husband's like, yeah, right? I'm like, it's just the horse.
Yeah.
The poor horse.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. And then I think the other thing that you said that was so super important and does take a lot of hard work, so I really commend you on it, is not being attached to the outcome. I mean, I think so many of us go into parenthood having no idea what to expect, and we have all these romanticized ideas of what school their kid is going to go to and the activities they're going to do and what kind of person they're going to be. And then that kid comes out and they're like, listen, I'm me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard.
It's
It's so
it's so
hard.
hard. It's so hard. And I do think I also want to say that your kids, I view my kids as some of my greatest teachers ever. Like
Mm,
the life lessons that I've had to learn that I'm still learning, I can just if you really pay attention, they're reflecting back to you things that you need to know. And I my son is on the
mm,
autism spectrum,
mm,
and so that changes a whole lot of things, right? On what your expectations are and how
mhm.
things should go. And I mean, that just kind of shook up my world from the beginning. So I definitely think that had a hand in me having the framework and the perspective on how to parent them
Yeah.
too.
Well, you had to speed up your learnings, or you would have probably had a really hard time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for
so
sure.
okay, so how old was he when he was diagnosed?
He was diagnosed, I think, around the age of 3.
Okay.
And before that, I had known that because I am watching twins develop side by side, right? And
Mm,
it's obvious that one is not with the other one.
right.
And the thing is that not your parents, your family sometimes will say, "Oh, well, boys, it's a boy. He develops slower," or
Yeah.
whatever. And but I had one of my best friends, her mom is a speech therapist, and when he wasn't talking or he wasn't on his milestone around 18 months, she started to put it in my ear, something to pay attention to, something to pay attention to. And then I at age 3 he only said 3 words while his sister was like,
Yeah.
almost full
Blabbering.
sentences.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fully. So it was then, it took a little time to get into the system or whatever. And then I had him evaluated by a team that had a psychologist, occupational therapist, a speech therapist, all the whole team of doctors. And at the end of that evaluation, that's when the lead doctor said, "Have you ever heard of autism?" And I was like, "Well, kind of." And then went over the findings. And one of the key, or a couple of the key things that came out is, number one, he didn't recognize himself in a mirror.
Mm, wow.
2, he didn't know, like when you threw him a ball, he
Mm,
didn't reciprocate. He didn't understand that you throw a ball back.
okay.
But because he had the eye contact, he was affectionate. He
Mm,
didn't have those,
mm-hmm.
it's kind of struck me like, what? Like,
Right.
I knew
Yeah.
he was language delayed, but I didn't know. And so, I mean, that's the most important thing, though, that he was evaluated so early, is because early intervention literally can change the trajectory of your kid's life.
Wow.
And call it whatever you want. I know some people, and rightly so, are adverse to labeling and such.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was more important to get the services that he needed from an early age, because I knew that would give him the best possible circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. I've shared this a little bit on the show, but um, we had a similar experience with a different outcome. My daughter went for her 3-year-old checkup, and the pediatrician was like, something's not right here. Like, she should be doing this, she should be doing that, all the milestones, like you were saying, and
Yeah.
did the whole thing, the evaluation, all of it. And the end result of the evaluation was that the doctor looked at me and said, "I think she has a strong case of new brother and quarantine syndrome. Like,
Oh,
she
wow.
just has been isolated from every one of her peers for a year." This was during COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
And like, my son, her little brother, was born 2 weeks before lockdown.
Oh, wow.
So it was just like a lot of change. And but we learned a lot in that process. And part of what we learned was I feel you, is that she's in a program now for her speech, because her speech is delayed and she's
Yeah.
getting better. But they helped me to understand that getting even that label for her gets her into a specialized program. Like,
Yes.
we're so fearful of something being different or something being quote unquote wrong with our children. Like, but if you can grapple with it, your adult mind, it gets the kid the help they need.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. But it's so I, here I am now, the 4-year-old, and she's in speech therapy, and we still see some differences. Like, my son is 2, and where he is at 2, I can totally see now where but I just didn't know, right? But
Yeah, of course.
um, but I've heard, and you can speak to it better, but the initial part of that process, I think, from the parent is grieving what you thought life would be like.
I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah.
I absolutely couldn't have said it better.
How did you cope with that? Like, how did you do it?
I think like any process of grief, you have to allow yourself to go through the stages. And then also, pointing back to my earlier comments of listening to your inner voice and really tuning into that. And if you're in relationship or partner, really coming together and decide, and work through it, which I'm sure is another level. In my circumstance, my husband at the time was not hearing it. He was not necessarily on board uh, with when all this was going on. But I had such um, conviction that it was the right thing to do, that I had to follow that authentic path. I had to, and here's the thing, it's not like it's pretty. It's not like once I decided that everything just fell into place. Oh my
Right.
goodness.
Right.
We could do a whole nother like week-long series about my, journey with autism,
Right.
and all of the things associated with it, because the acceptance of you're not necessarily going to have the thing that you planned in your mind is really kind of the same thing for any child you would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think too, because I don't want to minimize your experience, and I know you weren't trying to do that, but what I want to say is I think that because of the way our society is, the way our schools are set up, the way all of our systems are set up to function, they are set up for this supposedly normal kid and normal parents and normal. Like, I'm saying normal mockingly. It's like,
right, I know.
They're
Yeah.
set up this way so that it's like they're setting whoever this they is, right? Like, setting parents and kids up to automatically feel shameful or feel embarrassed or feel less than for just having to do what all of us have to do, accept your kids for who they are and parent your way through it the best you can. Yeah. Just with more challenges, more like roadblocks that are
like, and then it produces, the system, whatever that is, produces people that are equally, opinionated and mean and exclusion. They exclude you.
Yes.
My kid didn't get invited to any birthday parties growing up.
Yeah.
Like none, zero. The birthday parties we had was with him and his twin.
Yeah.
And some family, but that's it. And it's like, if you don't fit in this box, as you don't belong.
Yeah.
And you're so right that it's sometimes not even explicit. Sometimes it is, don't get me wrong. But sometimes it's just about how things are designed. Like taking my child to the fair, for example. We just went to the fair this last weekend, but I had looked on a Facebook memory, and 9 years ago, I took my kids to the fair and my son couldn't wait in line, right? There was you can't go to the fair. He had a full-on meltdown, throw himself on the floor because the sensory input was so severe that he couldn't function, right? So we just didn't go to the fair for years and years and years until he transitioned to be able to handle it better.
Yeah. I've heard this too with like even, kids with ADHD and, OCD, things like that, that just sitting in class, the way that some kids learn, like it's actually, I don't know, as a kid, I never thought twice about a lot of it, right? But now as an adult, you look at the fact that every kid in America is supposed to learn the same way.
Yep.
Like, I don't understand. How does that make sense?
To sit in rows, right? That are lined up facing the front. Make sure you sit up straight. Right. Don't make any noise. Don't bounce around, right?
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And and we're not here to solve this problem, right? Because it's a problem because you can understand how someone in charge has to figure out how to educate that many kids, right? And so there has to be some organization and thought and whatever, but it just like not every kid is going to learn the same, and not every teacher can teach the same way.
No,
We have to
not at
set the
all.
teachers up for success too.
Definitely. My daughter, she's so insightful, and maybe a couple of years ago, she's like, Mom, we all should have IEPs, the
Yeah.
individualized education plan, because that's what everybody needs. It doesn't matter if you have autism or not.
Yes.
We all need an IEP.
We
And I was
do.
like, that's brilliant.
We do. And it was actually one of the things that my therapist said to me that helped me initially feel a lot better. Like, because my daughter has an IEP, and this is the first time I'm hearing what an IEP is. I don't know. And I'm telling her what's involved, and she's like, gosh, I'd love that for my kid.
Of course. Yeah.
Like, professionals evaluating every aspect of him and how he is and what he needs. Like, oh my goodness. And it's like, yeah, every kid deserves that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a tangent.
A good one.
Yes,
Necessary one.
It was. Well, so how is he now? How are you doing now? All of you, the three of you.
So at 17, they are they look like mini grown people.
Yeah, I bet.
It's so weird. But I love it. I love the teenage years, and I know I sound probably crazy to some people, but I just really like it. And for my son, he is in a place where he's fully integrated into school. He had speech language therapy, but it really wasn't anything intense. He's not speech delayed. He's very articulate. But the social piece, right? The social piece is still something that I think we'll always work on. It's not that he doesn't want to be social. It's just awkward.
Yeah.
But how many teenagers are not socially awkward, right?
Right.
He's an honor roll student.
Wow.
He is absolutely flourishing in ways that are beyond my imagination, beyond what I could see as a young mother. And I've had what I call angels, because there's nothing else to describe them, teachers along the way that have been there in instrumental points in his life that have led the way to cultivate and grow, him into who he is today. And I will be inviting all of them to the graduation. I had one teacher one time that looked me in the eyes. I was like sobbing. And this is probably when he was in the 4th grade. And she looked me in the eyes and said, "Your son will graduate."
Wow. Yeah.
And my
I
kid,
just got the chills.
yeah. And not only that, he's planning on going to FAU, Florida Atlantic University, for college. He is college bound. He loves school. He's on the wrestling team. He's on the varsity wrestling team. They're juniors right now. And it's just incredible. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not whatever perfect is. I don't know what that word is.
Right.
We still have some bumps, but when you have a vantage point and you can kind of look back to where we've come from, it is nothing short of a miracle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for you sharing, because I know, there's women parents listening that are just in the early phases. I mean, even us, we don't regularly worry, right? But she's just like a regular preschool class, the whole 9. But, you just don't know. You don't know what's going to come. And I think any of us would be lying to say as parents we don't have concerns and worries. So it's always nice to hear the successes too, Sure.
And it's I would say that it's how you frame it. It sounds like you're framing it, extremely positively. And also there's something about faith, the belief that and the non-attachment too, the faith that it will work out, but also the non-attachment to like, I have to have, this particular thing happen for him.
Yeah.
And just know that it will be okay, whatever it looks like.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah, it is. It is hard, but and I'm getting jumpy because it's like, it's hard mainly because of what we've been taught to think is the be all end all.
Yes, for sure.
Like, even if your son wasn't getting great grades and going to college and on the wrestling team, it's like, okay, you know what? That's all wonderful. It is, but it's partly because we've been told that's what's wonderful. I don't know.
True.
I'm getting like real crazy about it now. I
No,
just
you're
like to,
right.
it's
You're
just,
right.
it is. I don't know. Now I feel like I just took away from that. I didn't mean to. I just more like whatever he ends up doing or not doing, or whatever my daughter ends up doing or not doing. It's like, it's what she's supposed to do.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right, Nicole. Okay, so Edward's authentic. I want to get back to it. Who is coming to you and what are they looking for out of the experience of working with you?
So Edwards Authentic is relatively still new.
Okay.
I founded it in 2019. And I honestly, when I started it, I battled with, do I want to do coaching or do I not want to do coaching? I'm like, I know that I'm a great coach, but do I want to do? So I landed on what I think I do absolutely best is facilitating workshops, right?
Okay.
So with that, my workshops are primarily focused on, like we've been talking about, all things personal development and all things really cultivating an authentic path personally and professionally. So my target audience are professional women, whether that's, regular professional, side hustle, or full-blown entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's unique, again, just like there's a unique path of a teenage girl, there's a unique path of a professional woman, and then we have all of these other hats, whether we're mothers, or caregivers. I'm in the sandwich generation right now where I have an elderly parent. My father just recently passed away a few
Mm-hmm.
months ago. So it's like this weird space where you're trying to be a boss, really,
Right.
but you still have kids and then you have elderly parents,
Wow. Yeah.
And so that's who I primarily focus my content with.
Okay.
And then my speaking is just sharing with a broader audience, those messages that we all need to hear. How do we tap into what is authentic for me? What does that even mean? And
Right.
how does not doing so, cost not only yourselves but the people around you? And what are the benefits of following that inner guide and cultivating and mastering that?
Okay. So what are some of the costs
What are some of the costs of not?
of not?
Oh, I can think of so much. I can think of any time that you are not in alignment,
Yeah.
it causes an internal struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And that internal struggle shows up sometimes in your mental health,
Mm-hmm.
in your relationships, conflicts, right? Your dissatisfaction with life. You feel like you are you're not in your own skin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's hell.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of
Yeah.
course. And so the need to please, I'm also recovering people pleaser. Uh,
As so many
and
of us are.
right. And as we're talking about, the journey of autism, we're still, and you're so right, there's still elements that you're trying to fit into
Right.
what should be. And I mean, you have a great point.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you not, how do you attend to that? How do you even recognize that that's going on? So the
Mm-hmm.
cost is that internal struggle. The cost is being unhappy with the way that your life's trajectory is going,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you think about that, if you are working in a company or you have your own business, you're not giving to others with your full self. You're not giving them the light and the that thing that you do when you show up in your authentic space that gives others permission to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not, it doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah. All right. So without going through obviously your entire workshop, someone listening, relating to all of this, resonating with this, like what are some things that someone could start doing today to start to tap into this?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is do kind of an assessment, so to speak. It doesn't have to be something formal, like I'm not going to give you like the Myers-Briggs profile or something like that, but an assessment to really kind of gauge, are you happy?
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
what areas of your life are working? What not so much? If you were really being honest with yourself and no one else would know what you're writing down, right? You don't have to share it with anybody,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And honestly, we probably, each one of us has an area or maybe more than one area that we're not necessarily like jumping backflips, you know, like
Right.
it's just not, it
Right.
doesn't bring us the joy that either
Right.
it once did, or it's just not a strength, right?
Mhm.
And I think from there, um, the first step is the awareness, right? The acceptance and the awareness, to then possibly look at that deeper and then figure out why, right? So once you do an assessment, then you can dig a little bit deeper and identify maybe where certain, you know, incongruence is happening, and how the way that you're showing up doesn't match what's really internal for you.
Mhm. Mhm. And I just want to say that I, having done some of this work, it all sounds lovely and it all sounds honestly simple enough.
Hmm.
It's like can be truly terrifying,
Yes.
you know, because
Yep.
part of, at least I'll speak for myself, part of it was saying, whoa, I don't think I want to be a full-time stay-at-home mom. And I can say that out loud now. But I spent
Yeah.
like a year not being able to. So it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of compassion, I think, for ourselves.
Definitely, especially because as we were talking in the first part of the conversation, that people will push back.
Mm-hmm.
Whether, you know, sometimes it's you against yourself.
Yeah.
But honestly, sometimes when you say that out loud, others will push back.
Right.
People will condemn you, will shame you,
Right.
right? People you know, people you don't know, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to endure that. And sometimes we don't want to say those things that are the real the real deal, because we just don't want to deal with that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm tired. I'm tired most of the time. And I only don't sound it right now because I had a ginger energy drink and a cold shower. So,
The
yes,
tools that you need.
exactly. Exactly. You know, and you touched on something that I think plays such a big role. And I don't know if you think about this at all. I'm sure you do. But as far as our authentic self and you, what you touched on is saying your truth and then having people you know, people you don't know, shame you or push back. I mean, this is the world we've created with social media. We're
Mhm.
putting our truths out there to benefit others and to benefit ourselves, and we're just inviting people to have opinions. Like, what is your relationship with social media? What do you think of it? Are you into it? Like, what does it look like for you?
I probably have a love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
There's seasons where I'm all in and it is what it is. And then there's seasons, maybe those are the seasons of my
Mm-hmm.
growing pains or whatever, that I'm over it.
Yeah.
You know, I think what I'm doing kind of more recently is trying to focus on my professional message and definitely infuse some of my personal experiences, but I definitely don't share anything that's still raw.
Hmm.
So if it's still raw for me and I have not come to a place where, you know, I am standing firm in my truth, then I
Mm-hmm.
tend to not share,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I think that's self-preservation. I think that's smart because, you know, being authentic is one thing, but it doesn't mean that you're a wide open thing for everybody to consume.
Right.
Like that's just not
Right.
the deal.
I mean, even the people that are sharing, photos of themselves crying in their cars because XYZ, like there are people that do that. I've done it before. It's like there's still parts of you and parts of the experience that actually brought you to tears that are private and
I
are
agree.
intimate.
I agree. Yep.
And we forget that a lot, I
Yeah.
think.
I I so agree with that. And I sometimes can get on my high horse about that, but so I'll try not to do that. But you're so right. There's some things. One of the things that someone told me when my kids were young, eh, and it, because I am a big thinker and I sometimes am on just this weird wavelength that I feel like I'm kind of by myself. And I was trying to share it with somebody, and it was probably mean at the time, but it's so true. And he's like, "Some things are just for you." And I probably was pissed off, like, but That's so true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't like if healing, this is my opinion. If healing is truly going to happen, right? You don't heal by bleeding all over the place on social media, right?
Right.
Now,
When you say it like that, yes.
as I mentioned,
Yes.
if there's an intention,
Mhm.
if that
Mhm.
that is really connected, with giving hope to somebody else, and I mean, there's all this nuance. Like, don't get me wrong, there's not a black or white answer,
Mhm.
but a lot of the times we're just working out our stuff
Mhm.
out there
Yeah.
without doing the internal work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear that. And I think of most recently, it was my birthday, and I posted about it being my birthday and saying, like, when you have a bout of depression and it's your birthday, here's what it looks like. And it's funny because that was my reality.
Yeah.
That's what I was experiencing. But when I really evaluate it, it was almost like it was easier for me to post on social media than to actually answer all of the happy birthday text messages and do all the phone calls back and almost like excuse myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, here's what's happening. I'm just depressed today. I know it's my birthday, but it doesn't really matter. So, I don't know. And I guess the other part of it about, some things are better for, or just for you or whatever, is like, it was almost like how could I be a person who's on social media and not post something about my birthday? Like having that pressure on myself.
Yeah.
But then just going, but I don't give a crap about that right now. So the way that I could do it was to say, I'm not feeling it today. And I don't know. I don't know what point I'm making. I think I'm making the point of, like, on one hand, feeling the pressure of social media that, like, even through depression, I feel like I need to post for my birthday. Like, that's kind of ridiculous, right? But also using social media as almost like an excuse to avoid the people in my real life. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot
No,
there,
that makes
I guess.
it makes total sense to me. It makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah.
I think there's two things, right? There's two things going on. The idea of using social media as the outlet, right? To, like you're saying, excuse yourself. But then, we're talking about what were you calling it? The being the villain.
Yeah.
Right?
The villain phase.
Sometimes you have to do that.
So
And you're allowed to do that.
I know.
You know what I mean?
I know. I know, but it's, you know what? I think it's uncomfortable for us to do it, right? And it's uncomfortable for us to do it, especially the first couple of times. I'm using air quotes. It's like, what is the first time that you're a villain? I don't know. But I think it's also uncomfortable not knowing if other people that are going to be receiving it have had their villain phase, and, like, are they going to understand? Are they going to and then you're going, do I care if they understand? And that's truly what makes it like a villain phase, because you're just like, don't care.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think they say that gets easier as we age.
Yes.
I'll let you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
there was a trend on TikTok recently where it's like there's like an audio that it's like, I'd rather paint my house with a Q-tip than worry about why you don't want to talk to me anymore. And it was about being just, like, at that stage of life of just like, no, I can't deal with this. I can't be bothered with that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it hits. But
yeah.
I want to ask you one more thing about social media. As far as your kids, you have teenagers. What is their relationship with social media?
They don't do social media.
Wow.
And
that's
it's not something. Yeah, I fought this fight.
Wow.
And to be just honest, like, it's not like I did this by myself, you know. They just aren't necessarily interested in it.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and thank God.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that I don't like. I do social media,
right.
but they don't see me doing it. They don't see, like, it's not a production. It's not something that I have in my front of mind. Oh, I got to post this on such and such.
Right.
So your kids watch you.
Right.
You know, your kids learn more from what you do sometimes than what you tell them to do or
Mm.
not do.
Oh, they totally do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think that probably has had a hand in it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they're just, I don't know.
It's just not their thing.
They're just not their thing.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
really grateful for it
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
you know,
Go
I
ahead.
would have had to prepare myself. It's not that I would say, no, you can't do
Right.
it.
Right.
I would have had to do it and then have parameters and skill myself up
Oh
and,
my
and
God,
do the
I
whole
can't.
thing.
Oh
I
my
would have.
God, I can't. I can't. Like, there's like the parents that have like the light switch that turns the Wi-Fi on and off in their house. There's like the parents that have the passwords and all. Oh my God, it just
Yeah.
seems
A
so
full-time job. Yeah. Yeah.
tedious.
And that probably does scare me if I'm honest, the level of the bullying that you hear happening,
Yeah.
the mean girls on 10,000 because
Yeah.
now it's on social media, the exclusion, the just it's like, you know, high school's hard enough.
Mhm.
I cannot imagine like flashback to when I was in high school if we had social media? Are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah. No. 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 When did we get it? I think we got it at the end of high school. It's like Facebook was like the first
Okay.
one. I got it at the end of high school. I don't know, maybe it was early high school. I don't remember. But but that's the point. I can't remember. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like fully in your face.
Yeah.
And it was very limited. That was when like Facebook you still had to like find people by what school they went to, you
Yeah.
know? And I'll
Mhm.
never forget, this is just like a silly tangent now, but like a little silly story, I'll never forget the day that they allowed high school and college students to friend each other on Facebook. I swear, because I remember I was sitting on my dining room table. I'm on the phone with all my girls, and like we're sitting there, we're like getting ready to be like, can we find all of our friends' older brothers on Facebook who are in college? Oh my God. It's like a big day for our
Wow,
social.
that's
Like,
funny.
yeah, it's funny. It's funny, right? And now kids in high school are like watching TikTok and making
Yeah.
TikToks and like the
Yep.
whole thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right.
Yeah.
Well, Nicole, is there anything either about your journey or your business or your message that you would have wanted to share today that I didn't think to ask you or just didn't get to?
I think this conversation has been incredible.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
you know, anything and everything that I've shared here, you know, is, you know, aligns with everything else that I talk about,
Yeah.
you know, in my offering. So I think this has just been an excellent space for us to have this just filled conversation.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your time. And I very much enjoyed this. So thank you.
Me too. Thanks so much.
Oh, I just love Nicole. Oh, she speaks of herself and her life with such grace and compassion. And I don't know about you, but that is a reminder that I need constantly. You know, it's amazing as an outsider to hear Nicole tell her story and to really see the connections and through lines. I mean, she shared experiencing an abusive relationship to then working with at risk girls, experiencing adversities as a highly sensitive and mixed race kid to then, you know, being an adult and a parent and seeing her son and herself experience challenges with his autism diagnosis and not being invited to birthday parties. And it's just, which breaks my heart. But you can see how what she's gone through in her life has prepared her for what came her way as an adult. And I know, because I know her and I've heard her share other stories that we didn't even get to on this podcast, that there are more stories like that in her life. And I think there are stories like that for all of us if we take the time to think about it. But what's central to all of Nicole's stories and her mission is that authenticity piece and the listening to your inner voice. You know, my mom talked about the inner voice a lot when I was growing up. She calls it the goddess, the inner goddess. And I can definitely recall times when I tuned into it, even as a kid, a teenager, in my 20s. But it's really been interesting as an adult to realize that much of that inner voice as a kid is actually the voices of my parents and relatives and teachers that I looked up to. And that as an adult, I had to start to differentiate what inner voice was still theirs and which is truly mine now. And it's actually a really tough transition and kind of a bumpy process. At first, I felt like making the distinction between what's mine and maybe what was theirs was a disownment or a disrespect to my parents, teachers, and loved ones who just so lovingly put really great voices in my head, right? But it makes sense. It makes sense that as a kid, you lean on the people you trust, you lean on your caregivers, you lean on your mentors and your teachers to show you the way and to be that voice in your head. And then it makes sense as an adult that you would develop and cultivate your own. So, I don't know. But Nicole also makes the point of it's one thing to acknowledge that we have an inner voice. It's a whole other thing to actually trust it. And in my experience, it's actually a lot easier to trust the voice that's in my head that comes from someone else that I love and admire. But when it's my voice, my thoughts, beliefs, convictions, and so on, it can feel scary sometimes. You know, you're holding yourself accountable. And, you know, it's a muscle that we have to work time and time again in order to feel confident and comfortable and trust. But we got to do it. So the good thing is that there are people out there like Nicole who can help us. So yes, check Nicole out. Check out her platforms, her website, all amazing resources, her TEDx. She's the best. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.